The sun was a fading red disk in the sky as the transport ship dropped out of the cloud cover and glided toward the surface of Zender 6. The planet looked like something straight out of a nightmare. Thick jungles stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with towering trees, massive plants, and strange, flickering lights from distant creatures. The atmosphere was dense, heavy with humidity, and a strange buzzing noise filled the air. This was a death world, a place where life fought every moment for survival. Inside the ship, the crew of alien Marines sat in their seats, silent and focused. They had seen many planets in their time, each more dangerous than the last, but none like Zender 6. This planet was known for its wild creatures, toxic air, and brutal terrain. The Marines, each an expert in their field, had been deployed for a simple mission: secure a research base on the planet's surface, a base that had gone silent months ago. But what made this mission different was the inclusion of one human soldier, Sergeant Jonah Cruz. Jonah sat near the back of the ship, adjusting the straps of his armor as he stared out the viewport. His expression was calm, almost bored, as if he'd done this 100 times before. The alien Marines, however, couldn't help but watch him with curious eyes. Cruz was the first human they had encountered in the field, and though they had heard stories, they didn't fully understand what a Deathworlder was. Humans, apparently, came from a planet full of danger, where even the air could kill you if you weren't careful. The alien Marines had no idea what to expect from this strange human, who seemed to carry an air of quiet confidence about him. "Ready for this, Cruz?" one of the Marines, a towering insectoid named Zithar, asked with a low growl. His 6 arms flexed in anticipation, and his many eyes studied the human closely. Cruz looked up at the alien, his expression unchanging. "Always ready," he said, his voice calm. "You guys nervous or something?" Zithar clicked his mandibles together. "We don't get nervous. But this place, it's unlike any other. Dangerous." Cruz gave a small smile. "You don't get it. I've been to worse." The other Marines shifted uneasily. Some exchanged looks, unsure whether the human was being brave or reckless. But what caught their attention was how Cruz said it. He wasn't boasting. It was a simple statement of fact. He truly believed it. The ship's engines whined as it descended, cutting through the thick atmosphere of Zender 6. The alien Marines stood, checking their weapons one last time. The drop would be rough. The jungles were wild, untamed, and filled with predators that hunted by scent and sound. There were no guarantees here. Even their advanced armor couldn't protect them from everything. "Let's move," Zithar ordered, his voice filled with authority. The team of Marines, led by the insectoid, stood in a line, and they prepared to exit the ship as it hovered over the jungle floor. The hatch opened, and the humid air rushed in, thick with the scent of moss and decay. There was a deep, rumbling noise in the distance, the sound of something large moving through the jungle. The team jumped down, landing in the thick foliage below. The ground was soft and spongy, as if the planet itself was alive, breathing. The leaves underfoot felt slick, and the air was oppressive, filling their lungs with moisture. Even with the heavy armor they wore, the humidity made it hard to breathe, and it didn't take long for sweat to bead on their foreheads. Cruz landed lightly on the ground, his boots making barely a sound. He adjusted his rifle, checking his surroundings. The rest of the team followed him as they moved cautiously through the jungle, their senses on high alert. Zithar looked back at Cruz, his antennae twitching in curiosity. "You're quiet for a human," he remarked. Cruz shrugged, his eyes scanning the area. "It's just a jungle, Zithar. We've got jungles on my world too." "Jungles," Zithar repeated, his mandibles clicking together. "But this is Zender 6. The creatures here will rip you apart before you even know they're there." Cruz didn't answer immediately. He simply moved forward, eyes sharp and alert. He had been trained for environments like this. He'd fought on his homeworld, a place that made Zender 6 look like a garden. Cruz knew what it was like to face a world where every step was a calculated risk, where the planet itself seemed determined to kill you. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the air grew thicker, the light dimmer. Strange sounds echoed around them: hisses, growls, the flapping of wings, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The alien Marines moved swiftly and with purpose, their advanced equipment scanning for any signs of danger. But despite the high-tech gear, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was always watching them, hidden somewhere in the shadows. After several hours, the team came to a clearing. The research base was ahead, nestled among the trees, quiet and abandoned. But it didn't feel safe. The silence was unsettling, like the calm before a storm. Cruz could feel it in his bones. Something was wrong. "Stay sharp," Zthar muttered, his 6 eyes flicking around. Cruz nodded but didn't respond. His eyes were already scanning the base, his hand ready on his rifle. Whatever had happened here, he knew it wasn't over. They weren't alone, not by a long shot. The jungle was eerily quiet as the team approached the research base. The trees around them were massive, their leaves thick and dark, casting long shadows over the ground. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and every now and then, a strange, high-pitched shriek echoed in the distance. It was clear to everyone that something was wrong. Cruz walked with his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning the environment, sensing that danger was closing in. The alien Marines, though trained for hostile environments, couldn't shake the feeling that this world was different, more alive and more dangerous than they had anticipated. Zthar led the group, his 6 legs moving with practiced ease through the dense undergrowth. His many eyes darted back and forth, always alert for any sign of movement. His antennae twitched, sensing the tension in the air. The rest of the Marines followed closely, their advanced armor making them appear almost mechanical in the heavy foliage. When they reached the clearing where the base was supposed to be, they stopped. The base was in ruins, walls broken and twisted, debris scattered across the ground. It looked as though something had torn through it, leaving nothing behind but destruction. The doors were wide open, hanging from their hinges, and the windows had been shattered. It was clear the base hadn't just gone silent. It had been attacked. Cruz's eyes narrowed. He could sense the faintest signs of movement in the shadows, just beyond the broken walls. He raised his hand, signaling the team to stop. The Marines immediately froze, waiting for his orders. "Something's here," Cruz said quietly, his voice low but steady. He motioned for them to stay behind cover as he moved forward. The other Marines exchanged uncertain looks, but they knew better than to question Cruz. The human had survived countless missions before. He was never wrong about these things. As Cruz advanced, his senses heightened. He could hear the faint sound of claws scraping against stone, a subtle but unmistakable noise. The human had been in enough dangerous places to recognize the signs. There was something waiting for them, something big. Without warning, a massive shape lunged out of the shadows. A creature, easily twice the size of the largest alien Marine, its scales glistening with venomous fluid, leaped toward Cruz. It had 4 muscular legs, a long tail, and a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth that snapped just inches from Cruz's face. The alien Marines reacted immediately, raising their weapons and firing. Energy blasts lit up the dark jungle, but the creature was fast, too fast. It dodged with terrifying agility, its body twisting and sliding through the air. Cruz, however, was faster. He dropped to the ground, rolling out of the creature's way just as it lunged again, missing him by a hair. The creature let out a roar that shook the ground as it turned to face Cruz, its eyes glowing with hunger. It stalked forward, its tail whipping behind it, and the sound of its claws scraping against the ground was deafening. Cruz stood up, ignoring the throb of pain in his side as he aimed his rifle. The alien Marines opened fire again, but this time, Cruz was already moving. With a sudden burst of speed, Cruz sprinted toward the creature, weaving through the alien Marines as they provided cover fire. He dove under the creature's massive form just as it snapped its jaws shut, missing him by inches. Using the momentum of his dive, Cruz swung his rifle around and fired point-blank at the creature's underbelly. The shot hit, and the creature howled in pain. It staggered back, its massive body shuddering as it tried to regain its balance. The alien Marines took the opportunity to unleash a coordinated attack, energy blasts striking the creature from all sides. It thrashed violently, its tail knocking one of the Marines off his feet. Cruz didn't hesitate. As the creature turned its attention back to him, he reached into his belt and pulled out a small, explosive charge. Without thinking twice, he hurled it toward the creature's chest, just as it lunged at him again. The explosion was deafening. The creature let out a final scream as its body was torn apart by the blast. Its remains crumpled to the ground in a heap of twisted, bloody meat. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The alien Marines stood in shock, their weapons still raised, unsure of what had just happened. Cruz, his face covered in sweat and dirt, stood over the remains of the creature. His breath came in short, heavy gasps, but he didn't show any sign of fear or hesitation. Zithar was the first to speak. "Impressive," he rumbled, his voice full of grudging respect. He had never seen anything like it. Humans were known for their strength, but Cruz had taken the fight to the creature with a courage and skill that none of them had expected. Cruz wiped his brow and looked up at the alien Marines. "It's not over yet," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency to it. "Stay alert." As the Marines checked their weapons and began to regroup, they couldn't help but watch Cruz with new eyes. The human had fought like a wild animal, fearless and relentless. But it wasn't just his courage that amazed them. It was the way he moved, the way he seemed to instinctively know what to do in a fight. For the first time, the alien Marines realized that Cruz wasn't just a soldier. He was something else entirely. He was a Deathworlder, and they were beginning to understand just how dangerous that could be. The jungle was silent again, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that meant something bigger was watching, waiting. The thick, humid air carried the scent of blood, the remains of the massive creature still steaming in the dim light. The alien Marines stood in tense formation, scanning the trees, their weapons still raised. Sergeant Jonah Cruz stood at the center of it all, his breathing steady despite the intense fight. He glanced down at the corpse of the beast, its thick hide still twitching with post-mortem spasms. He nudged it with his boot and exhaled. "Not the biggest thing I've fought," he muttered. Zithar, the squad leader, heard him and let out a low clicking sound. "You mean there are worse creatures than this on your world?" His multiple eyes shifted toward Cruz with something close to disbelief. Cruz gave a small, tired grin. "Oh yeah, this one's just a big lizard. Back home, we've got predators that can sense your heartbeat from 100 meters away. Some don't even need eyes to hunt you." The alien Marines exchanged glances. They had trained on many harsh worlds, but hearing Cruz talk about Earth as if it were more dangerous than Zender 6 sent a chill through them. "Enough talk," Star finally said. "We need to move." The squad advanced toward the ruined research base, stepping over broken metal and shattered equipment. The smell of burnt circuits and decay filled the air. Something had attacked this place, something strong enough to rip through reinforced steel like paper. Cruz knelt beside a half-buried console, brushing dirt off the cracked screen. The damage was old, maybe weeks, maybe months. He glanced at a pile of scattered bones nearby. Whatever had attacked the base had left no survivors. "Looks like they didn't even have a chance," muttered one of the Marines, a reptilian named Vorka. He poked at a claw mark in the metal wall. "These cuts, whatever did this had massive claws. Bigger than that thing we just killed." Cruz stood up and adjusted his grip on his rifle. "Then we better be ready." Before anyone could respond, the jungle came alive with movement. The air filled with the rustling of leaves, the sound of something big, many things, moving toward them. The Marines snapped into position, weapons raised, their armor systems locking into combat mode. Cruz barely had time to react before the first creature lunged from the trees. It was faster than the last one. Black, chitinous, covered in overlapping armor plates. It had 6 legs, each ending in hooked talons, and a mouth lined with writhing tendrils. The creature let out a screech, its jaws snapping toward Cruz's throat. He ducked, rolling to the side, but another was already behind him. It swiped with a clawed limb, and before he could fully dodge, pain exploded through his left arm. He barely registered the strike before he hit the ground. The moment felt slow. His vision blurred, but he could hear the gunfire around him, the shouts of the alien Marines. He looked down. His left arm was gone. The creature's strike had severed it just below the elbow. Blood poured from the wound, staining his armor and the jungle floor beneath him. Any other soldier would have collapsed in shock, screamed in pain, or at least hesitated. Cruz did none of those things. With a grunt, he yanked a bandage from his belt with his remaining hand and bit down on it, using his teeth to pull it tight around the stump. His vision flickered from the pain, but he forced himself to move. He didn't have time to stop. Stopping meant dying. A shadow loomed over him, another creature, ready to finish the job. Cruz reacted purely on instinct. He grabbed his pistol with his right hand, rolled onto his back, and fired directly into the monster's open mouth. The shot burned through its skull. The creature let out a gurgling hiss before collapsing beside him, twitching as its life faded. The other Marines were still locked in combat, blasting the creatures with plasma rounds. Star fought with his 4 arms, using both guns and melee strikes to keep them at bay. Vorka had climbed onto a fallen tree, sniping them with deadly precision. But none of them had seen what had happened to Cruz. Until now. Zithar turned his head for a brief second, and his entire body froze when he saw Cruz still standing, still fighting, despite his missing arm. For a moment, Zithar couldn't believe it. Any of his own soldiers, any other species, would have been out of the fight. The pain alone should have been unbearable. Yet Cruz moved as if nothing had happened. His breathing was controlled. His aim was steady. Blood still dripped from his wound, but it didn't slow him down. Cruz fired again, taking down another creature before reloading with one hand, using his knee to brace the weapon. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When the final creature collapsed, silence returned. The Marines stood among the bodies, catching their breath. Some of them had taken injuries, but nothing compared to Cruz. Zithar approached the human, his antennae twitching with disbelief. "Cruz, your arm." Cruz glanced down at the blood-soaked bandage, then back up at Zithar. He let out a breath. "Yeah, kinda noticed." Zithar didn't understand. This wasn't normal. He had seen warriors fight through pain, but this was something else. How are you still moving?" Cruz gave a half-smile, wiping blood from his face. "Because we don't stop. Not until the mission's done." The other Marines gathered around, their expressions unreadable. They had heard stories about humans before, about their stubbornness, their insane survival instincts. But now they had seen it firsthand. Deathworlders didn't just survive. They refused to die. And for the first time, the alien Marines truly understood what it meant to fight alongside a human. Cruz wasn't just a soldier. He was a force of nature. And whatever awaited them deeper in the jungle, one thing was certain. Cruz would keep going, no matter what. The jungle of Zender 6 had swallowed them whole, and the deeper the team moved, the darker and more dangerous it became. The air was thick with the scent of decay and moisture. The ground was covered in spongy moss, and every step made a squelching sound as they moved forward. Every shadow seemed to hide a predator, and every rustle of leaves set their nerves on edge. But Cruz didn't seem to notice the danger. His eyes, though tired, were sharp, scanning the surroundings as though he could sense the threat before it appeared. The alien Marines, while still on high alert, couldn't help but watch him. He was still bleeding from the wound on his left arm, but it didn't seem to bother him. He had wrapped the stump tightly, but the blood still seeped through. It was clear that the human had been hurt, badly, but there was no sign of slowing down. He kept moving forward, steady and sure. "You're a hard one to kill, Kruz," Vorka, the reptilian marine, remarked as he fell into step beside the human. His voice had an almost respectful edge to it. Kruz glanced at him, offering a brief nod. "Yeah, I guess I am," he replied, his voice low but steady. "We don't die easily where I come from." Vorka looked at him for a moment, then flicked his tongue and thought, "I've seen death. We all have. But not like this. You're different." Kruz didn't respond right away. He just kept moving, taking careful steps as the team made its way deeper into the jungle. But he could feel the shift in the air around them. The Marines were beginning to realize what made humans so dangerous. It wasn't just their strength or their fighting skills. It was the fact that they never gave up. No matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, humans found a way to keep going. The group pressed on, moving cautiously but steadily. The base was not far now. They could see the jagged edges of the mountain range ahead, the last known location of the base's emergency beacon. But as they reached the foot of the mountains, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The low hum that had been building in the air became a low roar. Kruz froze, his senses instantly alert. He raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. The Marines, trained to follow orders without question, halted immediately. They all looked to Kruz, who was standing still, his eyes narrowed, scanning the ground beneath them. "I don't like this," Kruz muttered. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, a quiet tension. "Something's coming." The ground shook harder now, and the roar grew louder. The trees overhead began to sway, and the sky darkened as if a storm was brewing. But it wasn't a storm. It was something far worse. A roar, loud enough to shake the trees, split the air. The sound was deafening, full of raw power. The alien Marines immediately began raising their weapons, looking around for the source of the noise. "What is that?" Star growled, his voice low and filled with suspicion. Kruz was already moving, stepping forward as if he had sensed something others hadn't. He scanned the area around him, looking for any sign of movement. Then, from the dense jungle ahead, something huge emerged, something enormous. It was a creature unlike any the Marines had ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a small building. Its body was a mass of scales, covered in sharp, jagged spikes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. It had 4 powerful legs, each ending in massive claws capable of crushing stone. But it was the head that truly made it terrifying. A massive, tooth-filled maw, lined with razor-sharp fangs, opened wide as the creature let out another deafening roar. Its eyes, glowing like fire, locked onto the group. For a moment, no one moved. The creature's sheer size and power were enough to make anyone hesitate. But Kruz didn't hesitate. He took a step forward, his rifle already aimed at the creature. "Open fire," Kruz shouted, his voice cutting through the tense air. His command was sharp, firm. The Marines followed his orders without question. Energy blasts flew through the air, but the creature didn't flinch. It was too large, too powerful. The shots seemed to bounce off its thick scales, doing little more than angering it. The creature charged forward, moving at an unbelievable speed despite its size, its claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. Kruz dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the first swipe. His left arm throbbed, the pain flaring up, but he ignored it. He needed to keep moving. He fired his rifle as he rolled to his feet, hitting the creature in the eye. The shot staggered it for a moment, but it didn't stop. Zethar and the rest of the Marines unleashed a continuous barrage of plasma fire, but it was clear that conventional weapons weren't going to stop this monster. The creature roared again, charging toward the group with terrifying speed. Kruz's eyes narrowed. He knew they were in trouble. This wasn't just another fight. It was a battle for survival. The creature was too powerful, too resilient. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. "Focus on its legs," Cruz shouted, even as he continued to fire. "If we can bring it down, we have a chance." The Marines adjusted their fire, aiming for the creature's legs. They hit, but the creature was like a tank, its thick skin protecting it from most of the blasts. It wasn't enough. Cruz gritted his teeth. He needed to do something more. He glanced around, searching for any advantage. His eyes landed on a massive rock formation near the base of the mountain. It was risky, but it was the only chance they had. "Cover me," Cruz yelled, diving toward the rock formation. Zithar and the others fired in unison, providing cover as Cruz sprinted toward the rock. His movements were quick and precise despite his injury. The creature roared in frustration, but it was too focused on the alien Marines to notice Cruz's movement. When he reached the rock, Cruz pulled a small explosive charge from his pack. With one hand, he attached it to the base of the rock formation. Then, without waiting for the countdown, he dove behind cover. The explosion was deafening. The entire rock formation collapsed, blocking the creature's path and crushing its legs beneath the rubble. The beast let out a final pained roar as it fell to the ground, unable to move. For a moment, everything was still. Cruz, panting heavily, looked back at the team, who were all staring at him in disbelief. He wiped the blood from his brow and smirked. "That's how we do it back home." The jungle fell silent once more, the last echoes of the massive creature's death roar fading into the dense foliage. Dust and smoke hung in the air, obscuring the view. The team stood still, breathing heavily, their weapons still raised, waiting for any sign of another threat. Cruz, despite the blood dripping from his severed arm, didn't flinch. He was kneeling, adjusting his rifle, his eyes scanning the surroundings. His mind was focused, as always, on the next move. Zithar stepped forward, his 6 legs moving gracefully over the rough terrain. His many eyes locked onto Cruz. He was still processing what had just happened. The human, injured, had not only fought with skill, but had led them in taking down a beast that at first seemed invincible. "You are remarkable, Cruz," Zdar said, his voice full of awe, though he struggled to understand how a creature could act with such resilience. His antennae twitched, a sign of both respect and confusion. "You do not stop." Cruz looked up at him, his lips curling into a tired smile. "You're not wrong. But I'm not done yet," he muttered, his voice rough, but determined. "We've got a base to find." Vorka, the sharp-eyed reptilian, stepped closer to the group. His scales were scratched, but he appeared unharmed. He glanced at Cruz's missing arm and shook his head. "You should rest. Your injury." Cruz's grin widened, but it was laced with pain. "No time for rest, Vorka. We're close. I can feel it. We finish the mission. We don't stop. Not until it's done." The alien Marines exchanged uneasy glances, but they knew better than to argue with the human now. They had seen what Cruz could do. He had faced down creatures that would have torn any of them apart. And now, they were going to follow him until the mission was over. With a final glance at the fallen creature, the group moved forward. The base was nearby. As they trekked deeper into the jungle, the mood shifted. The heavy tension in the air had settled, but there was an unspoken understanding between them now. They were no longer just soldiers following orders. They were a team that had been through a fight together, a team that had learned to trust one another's skills. They had seen the strength in Cruz, and it had awakened something in each of them. They were ready for whatever came next. The jungle opened up ahead, revealing a clearing. There, amidst the tangled growth, lay the remains of the research base. It was smaller than they had expected, a fortified outpost built into the side of the mountain, surrounded by thick walls of metal and reinforced glass. It had once been a high-tech facility, but now it was nothing more than a pile of twisted scrap. Zithar raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. His antennae twitched as he scanned the area. Cruz didn't need a signal. He was already moving, his boots crunching softly against the overgrown ground. His mind was focused on the task ahead. He could feel it. The urgency, the need to get to the core of this mystery. Something had attacked the base. Something powerful. The team followed in silence. As they reached the base's outer perimeter, Cruz waved them forward. There was no sign of movement, no hint of any life remaining. The doors were torn open, jagged edges of metal hanging loosely from their frames. Cruz knelt by the doorframe, inspecting the damage. The inside of the base was dark, but he could see faint traces of blood and scorch marks. He touched the ground, feeling the heat beneath his fingers. "It's been recent," he muttered, standing up. "Whoever did this, they're still out there." Star nodded, his many eyes focused on the darkened interior. "We should proceed with caution." The team filed into the base, moving in pairs. Cruz took the lead, stepping into the darkened hallway. His senses were on high alert. Every door, every corner could be hiding a new threat. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of burned circuits lingered in the air. The first room they came to was a control center, its terminals shattered and sparks still flickering from the remains of the central computer. Cruz walked over to the console, his remaining hand working quickly to pry open the damaged panel. He had learned to fix things with nothing more than his wits and basic tools. The screen flickered to life with a sudden burst of static. Cruz's eyes widened as data scrolled across the screen, too fast for him to fully read. But the important part was clear. The research team had been studying something alive, something powerful, dangerous, and capable of causing mass destruction. "What is it?" Zathar asked, moving up behind Cruz to look at the data. Cruz's eyes narrowed as he read the final lines. "It's a weapon, but it's not like anything we've ever seen. These people were trying to control it." Vorka's eyes gleamed with interest. "Control what?" Cruz's voice grew darker. "Something that shouldn't be controlled. Whatever it is, it's not just an animal. And it's not just a weapon. It's alive and intelligent." Star's many eyes blinked in disbelief. How could they have known? "They didn't," Cruz replied grimly. "They unleashed it by accident. And now it's loose." The realization hit the team hard. They had thought they were just dealing with a dangerous planet, hostile creatures, and a simple mission. But now they understood. The enemy wasn't just some wild animal. It was something far worse, something more intelligent, more dangerous. Cruz's jaw tightened. He didn't say it out loud, but the thought weighed heavily on his mind. If this creature was still out there, it wasn't just a threat to the base. It was a threat to everything. Suddenly, the ground shook again. This time, it wasn't the tremor of distant movement. It was close, far too close. Cruz's hand flew to his weapon, and he turned to the team. "Get ready," he ordered. "It's here." The alien Marines readied their weapons. They could hear the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving toward them. The sound of massive claws scraping against the floor, followed by the deep, rumbling growl of something much too large for them to handle. And then the door exploded inward, and the team was face to face with the creature they had been warned about. The door exploded with a deafening crash, and the team barely had time to react before the creature was upon them. It was massive, easily 20 feet tall, with thick, armored skin that shimmered in the low light of the base. Its eyes glowed with a fiery orange hue, and its mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth. Each step it took sent tremors through the ground, and the air was filled with the scent of raw aggression. Cruz's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained sharp. He was already moving, his remaining arm gripping his weapon with a deadly calm. He had seen the creature's data on the console, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer scale of it in person. "Take cover," Cruz shouted, his voice loud and commanding, cutting through the panic. "Stay in formation." The Marines scattered, taking cover behind whatever they could find. Broken consoles, fallen debris, and even the remnants of shattered walls. The creature snarled, its breath heavy and filled with malice, as it turned its massive head toward the team. It didn't seem to be affected by the plasma rounds that slammed into its thick hide, its body barely even flinching from the onslaught. Zithar, the alien squad leader, was the first to fire, unleashing a series of precise shots aimed at the creature's eyes. But the beast barely noticed. It roared, a sound that rattled their bones, and surged forward, slashing with its massive claws. The force of the strike sent debris flying, and Kruz had to dive out of the way just to avoid being crushed. "Everyone, keep moving," Kruz barked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to take it down fast." Vorka, a sharp-eyed reptilian marine, fired his weapon, hitting the creature's leg. The shots did little to slow it down, but they distracted it long enough for Zithar to reposition himself. The squad leader wasn't deterred. His multiple arms moved with deadly efficiency, firing with one hand while preparing a grenade with the other. "Grenade out," Star shouted as he hurled the explosive toward the creature's face. The grenade detonated in a brilliant flash of light, sending a shockwave through the air. For a moment, the beast staggered back, its head jerking to the side. But it didn't stop. Instead, it turned its attention to Zithar, its fiery eyes narrowing as it locked onto him. Kruz's mind raced. The creature was too powerful for conventional weapons. They needed a new strategy, something fast, something unexpected. "Vorka, cover Zithar. The rest of you, target its legs," Kruz shouted as he dashed toward the creature, his remaining hand gripping his rifle tightly. "We'll take it down from the ground." Vorka obeyed without hesitation, launching a flurry of shots to keep the creature distracted. Star, despite his multiple arms, was forced to dodge the beast's wild swipes, barely avoiding the deadly claws that came crashing down around him. But the creature's attention was firmly on him now. It was focused, enraged, and determined to finish the job. Kruz didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the creature, his movements fast and precise despite the pain in his injured arm. He needed to get close enough to do some real damage. As he neared the creature, he saw an opening, a weak point in its armor beneath its thick legs. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small explosive device. His fingers trembled slightly, but his mind was calm. He was used to working under pressure, used to thinking fast, when everything seemed stacked against him. "Get down," Kruz shouted, tossing the device into the gap beneath the creature's leg. The explosive detonated with a thunderous boom, sending the creature howling in pain. The blast tore through its thick hide, leaving a gaping wound. The beast staggered back, its massive form trembling from the force of the explosion. Blood, black and viscous, spilled from the wound, splattering the ground. The creature roared in fury, but it was clear that it was wounded. The Marines wasted no time, continuing their barrage of fire, now more focused than ever. Plasma rounds hit the creature's exposed leg, and the beast faltered, its movements becoming sluggish. It was slowing down. "Keep firing," Kruz shouted. "We're almost there. Don't let up." The team continued to unload everything they had. Vorka's sharp aim found another weak spot on the creature's other leg, and with a well-placed shot, the beast let out another roar of pain. The monster's balance began to falter as its legs gave out under the assault. With a final push, Zithar hurled another grenade at the creature's chest, aiming for its heart. The explosion erupted in a flash of light, and the creature let out a deafening cry before collapsing to the ground with a violent thud. For a long moment, there was silence. The massive creature lay still, its body twitching slightly as the life drained from it. The team stood still, catching their breath, their weapons raised in case it wasn't quite finished yet. But it was. The creature was dead. Kruz stood over the fallen beast, his chest heaving from exertion. His face was covered in blood, his remaining arm aching, but there was a grim satisfaction in his eyes. They had won. Against all odds, they had brought down the monster that had haunted them for so long. "We did it," Kruz said, his voice quiet but filled with relief. Zethar, still panting from the fight, looked over at Cruz. For the first time since they had met, there was a look of respect in his eyes. "You are truly remarkable, Cruz," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I have never seen anything like you before." Cruz gave a tired smile, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Just doing what I do best." Vorka stepped forward, his scales glistening in the dim light. "You fought with more than just strength. You fought with heart. That's what makes you different." Cruz nodded, his expression hardening again as he scanned the area. The fight was over, but the mission wasn't. They still had answers to find, still had to deal with the fallout of the research base's experiments. But for now, they had taken down the biggest threat they would face on Zender 6. As the team regrouped, Cruz glanced around at his comrades. His team. They had survived this together. "Let's finish what we started," he said, his voice firm. And with that, they moved forward. The jungle was quiet once more, but the path ahead was still full of danger. Whatever secrets lay hidden in the research base, Cruz knew they would find them. And whatever enemies awaited them, they would face them together. The team moved cautiously through the wreckage of the research base, their eyes constantly scanning for any remaining threats. The enormous creature they had just defeated lay motionless behind them, but Cruz knew the real challenge was still ahead. They had learned a lot from the base's remains, but there was one last thing to discover, something that might explain why the creature had attacked and what the research team had been really working on. Cruz led the way, his mind racing with questions. The data he had seen on the console had painted a chilling picture. The research team had been trying to harness the creature's power for military purposes. They had believed they could control it, but they had underestimated its intelligence and ferocity. "Stay sharp," Cruz ordered, his voice steady. "We don't know what else might be hidden here." Vorka, the reptilian marine, moved beside him, his keen eyes scanning the dark corridors. "The base is quiet." "Too quiet," Vorka murmured, his voice low. He was right. After the battle with the creature, the base felt even more empty, as if all the life had been drained from it. Zethar, his many limbs moving with precise efficiency, was already examining a nearby control panel. His multiple eyes flicked over the screen, processing the data. "I believe this terminal is still active," he said, his voice tinged with hope. "We might be able to find more information." Cruz nodded. "Good. Let's see what we can find." As Zethar worked, Cruz and the others spread out, checking the rooms and securing the area. The hum of the base's remaining power systems was the only sound that filled the otherwise silent space. Every corner they turned, every door they opened, felt like a step closer to understanding the horror the research team had unleashed. Minutes passed as Zethar typed rapidly, his antennae twitching with concentration. Finally, he turned to Cruz. "I found something. It's a recording, a final message from the research leader." Cruz stepped forward, his interest piqued. "Play it." The screen flickered to life, revealing a haggard-looking human figure, a scientist, dressed in a torn lab coat. His eyes were wide with fear, and his voice trembled as he spoke. "To anyone who finds this message," the scientist began, I don't know how to explain this. We thought we were studying a new species, something that could help humanity. But we were wrong. So wrong. The creature, the one you've probably already encountered, is not a weapon. It's a force of nature. We thought we could control it, but we failed. And now, it's free." The scientist's voice broke, and he paused to wipe a tear from his face. "It's too intelligent, too powerful. It learned how to escape, and it's not alone. There's more of them. If you're hearing this, you need to get out. We've made a terrible mistake, and we won't survive it." The screen went black, and the room fell into an eerie silence. The team exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. Cruz's stomach tightened as the weight of the message stank in. "More of them," Vorka whispered, his voice low with concern. "How many?" Zithar's antennae flicked nervously. I do not know. The data does not show specifics, but it is clear that the creatures were bred in large numbers. And they have escaped. Cruz clenched his jaw, his hands tightening around his rifle. We need to stop this now. If there's a whole army of these things out there, we can't let them spread. Zithar nodded. Agreed. But the question remains, how do we stop them? They are beyond anything we've ever encountered. Cruz took a deep breath, forcing himself to think. The team had already taken down one of these beasts. But if there were more, they would need a plan, a real plan, not just brute force. We have to find the source, Cruz said. There's got to be something here that can help us understand how to defeat them. A weakness, a way to stop them before they spread across the planet. The team moved deeper into the base, determined to find answers. As they approached the central research chamber, Cruz's heart raced. The door to the chamber was partially open, its metal frame twisted and bent. Whatever had happened here had been catastrophic. Inside, the room was a wreck. Equipment was destroyed, scattered across the floor in pieces. But in the center of the room was a large containment unit, its glass walls cracked and shattered. The creature that had once been held inside was gone, but the remnants of its cell were still there. On a nearby table, Cruz spotted something, a datapad, still intact. He grabbed it, quickly scanning through the files. As he read, his face hardened. He didn't need to read more than a few lines to understand what had happened. The research team hadn't just been studying the creatures, they had been experimenting on them, trying to enhance their abilities. They had been breeding them for war. And in their arrogance, they had created something they could not control. These things are weapons, Cruz said quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. They're not just creatures. They're living, breathing soldiers. Zithar stepped forward, his many eyes narrowing as he examined the datapad. And now they are loose. This is a disaster. The full scope of the situation hit Cruz hard. The research team's mistake wasn't just a mistake. It was a global threat. These creatures, bred for war, were out there somewhere, and they were hunting. We need to stop them, Cruz said firmly, his resolve hardening. But first, we need to find out how many of them are out there. We need to track them down, one by one. As the team gathered around him, ready for whatever came next, Cruz could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But there was no turning back now. They had started this mission, and now it was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of humanity. The team was ready, and Cruz would lead them to the end, no matter what it took.